sure whether, I think it's the learning process more than typically the evaluation process that's starting to actually show an increased focus. Because generally, I mean, I don't know if it's completely true, but I think generally you get better by getting more focused. So I think the issue for big global organisations like VSO, and VSO is a reasonably big organisation, it works in 25 countries, used to work in more, but we focused down over the last few years, so 25 countries in Asia and Africa. Through historically international volunteers, so Chris was a volunteer, Sylvia was a volunteer as well. I was a volunteer 25 years ago. And, you know, but we also now work with community volunteers, lots of, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of community volunteers, so it's part of our approach, so we work with all different kinds of volunteering. But the issue, I think, in all international NGOs is the focus on trying to read the local context and let people make local decisions makes it very difficult to actually agree on certain focus areas. So even if you say, so if I look, you know, last year, I had a really good look across our work on health education, livelihoods and governance. And if you plot it, which nobody had, if you plot it as a portfolio across the 25 countries, you see lots and lots of small projects. If somebody from outside the organisation came in, they'd think, this is incredible, that you have all these small projects. Where is the actual, you know, beyond health, for instance, where is your focus? And the reason for that is because it's driven by local decision making. Because in an organisation like VSO, like many NGOs, you know, you want to put the local context first. But actually, that isn't, if you look at it in the organisational level, that's actually not a good way to behave, because as a global organisation, you have got to increase your total amount of impact, full stop. So if you have a really diversified portfolio, and every health project is different in every country, as a global, so that might work, the small projects might be quite good, but globally, your impact will be lower than if you have a more strategic approach and you choose a few areas where you grow your knowledge base. So how do you grow? So the organisation, so if you look at VSO's knowledge historically, the knowledge sits in its volunteers and the partners it has. It has no organisational knowledge, particularly around how to do health. And as a result of increasing our learning and asking some of these questions, what we've ended up is selecting 7 areas to focus on. So 2 in health, neonatal health and maternal health is one area, adolescent and sexual reproductive health is another. 2 in education, one is around technology, one is inclusive education, 2 in livelihoods, and 1 in governance. And immediately, by setting that as a framework, so it's still health, education, livelihoods, and governance, but by selecting those areas and steering people in that way, we have more knowledge. We can start to build the organisation's knowledge. So in neonatal health, we can do research that benefits all the countries we're working with in Africa on neonatal health, rather than tiny little projects. So in a way, I've told you the end of the story before we begin, because that is our approach. That's what the strategy, the learning strategy, is trying to drive us toward. So typically, you know, people say, oh, the organisation, this may be a few years ago, oh, we do M&E. We do, that's what everybody says. And they link M&E as if it's a single thing. But M&E isn't a single thing. Monitoring and evaluation are 2 different things. And when people say M&E is a single thing, it actually is, in my mind, it is worrying, really, because what they generally mean, what I found people generally mean is they do monitoring. So actually, and that's why I put most organisations actually, when they talk about M&E, they do monitoring, and they don't really do evaluation. Anyway, I think people in the organisation, we genuinely agree that that was right. Not because I said it, but you know, we started to have the conversation. Then we said, about a year ago, we actually said, no, we don't do M&E, we do MAL, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, because in fact, the monitoring evaluation is really not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is learn, and monitoring and evaluation support the learning. So really, you should call it LEM, or you should have M&E over the L, because it's the L, the M&E and processes to drive your learning. But in fact, actually, that in itself, you will still, your MEL will still is separated from most of the organisation. So what you're then looking at is putting the P in, and ideally, really, there are too many letters, you could put an R on the end. So your P is, you're trying to link your monitoring, evaluation, and learning into your planning. So when people plan their work, they should be planning their monitoring and evaluation simultaneously. Planning is not a separate event, and then later on somebody monitors and then somebody else evaluates it. That's all connected. But you could put an R at the end because actually, periodically, you review and you replan. So your planning fits right the way around it. And then, I don't know if anybody else has come across this sort of PMELC, or whether that is a VSO. A VSO innovation means something rude in Dutch or something. But PMELC is the idea that actually the knowledge is actually the most critical thing. Is one of the most critical things. The knowledge. So what you're harvesting in your monitoring, and particularly in your evaluation, you're harvesting your good practice, you're harvesting your innovation, and you take that out and you put it into your knowledge system, and you get your good practice. So this is, in our case, would be in neonatal care, some particularly good work we did in Ethiopia around setting up neonatal intensive care units we did in Ethiopia. If you don't put that into your knowledge system, that will sit in Ethiopia and a few hospitals will benefit. If you put that into your knowledge system, which that's what you've learned from your evaluations, that these neonatal intensive care systems make a difference. The question is, if you put it in your knowledge system, you can then start testing, does that make any difference in the neighbouring countries? Or is it something particular to Ethiopia? And once you get that, people start thinking of that, then you start getting better. You start using the experience in one country to drive the performance and your impact of your global organisation. So that's how I think that all sits together.